In 1518, in a small town in France, a woman stepped into the street and began to dance. There was no music, no celebration, no reason. But she didn't stop. Hours turned into days, and then something even stranger happened. Others joined her. Dozens of people, dancing uncontrollably, unable to stop, even as their bodies began to fail. Some collapsed, some died, and no one could explain why. This is the story of one of history's most bizarre and disturbing events, the dancing plague of 1518. What caused it? Mass hysteria, or something far more unknown? Welcome to Curiosity Rift.
This historical engraving shows the layout of Strasbourg, France, in the early 16th century. Enclosed tightly by its city walls, this densely packed urban center was operating as a pressure cooker in July 1518. A string of brutal famines had pushed the population to the edge of starvation, creating an atmosphere of inescapable tension. Right in the middle of this suffocating environment, a woman named Frau Trophäa stepped out of her half-timbered house and onto a cobbled street. Without a single instrument playing, she began to twist, twirl, and violently thrash her limbs in a rhythmic, trance-like state. Her husband begged her to stop, but her body refused to obey. She ignored all pleas from onlookers, keeping up this erratic movement until she collapsed from exhaustion. Then, after a brief period of restless sleep, she stood back up on swollen feet and immediately resumed the exact same frantic motions. Within days, an undeniable contagion of visual mimicry took hold. Dozens of exhausted, terrified bystanders who had been watching her strange performance began to involuntarily mirror the behavior, falling into the same uncontrollable physical trance. This was a collective surrender of human autonomy, a biological malfunction that overrode every instinct for self-preservation. By August, the crisis had trapped 400 citizens in its grip. People were visibly screaming in pain, their feet bleeding through wooden clogs and leather shoes. Dehydration and hyperventilation set in, and the physical toll reached a fatal threshold, with dozens dropping dead in the streets from severe exhaustion and heart failure. Desperate to regain control, the city's Privy Council consulted local physicians, who diagnosed the affliction as hot blood, a supposed overheating of the brain. Based on this theory, the doctors prescribed the counterintuitive treatment. The victims needed to forcefully dance themselves free of the illness, sweating the hot blood out of their systems. As seen in this historical illustration depicting the plague, the authorities actively facilitated this treatment by sending in pipers and drummers to play directly next to the collapsing dancers. The city cleared out green markets, constructed wooden stages, and paid these professional musicians to keep the afflicted in constant motion day and night. This animated diagram illustrates a neurological concept called entrainment. It shows how external rhythmic sound, like the heavy, repetitive beat of a drum, can force the brain to synchronize its own erratic electrical frequencies to match the external audio wave. As that synchronization expands outward, we see how the acoustic bombardment weaponized the situation. The constant drumming acted as a neurological catalyst, pulling terrified, already stressed bystanders into an inescapable feedback loop where their bodies synchronized with the noise. The city council's aggressive medical intervention backfired, directly engineering the deadliest phase of the epidemic. To make sense of the event today, modern science has proposed several biological theories. For decades, the leading hypothesis was that the dancers consumed rye bread infected with ergot, a psychotropic mold that produces chemicals closely related to LSD. However, this circulatory schematic demonstrates why the ergot theory fails. Ergot poisoning severely constricts blood vessels in the body's extremities, causing gangrene and immobilizing seizures. A human being poisoned by this fungus would lack the massive oxygen flow required to sustain days of high-intensity aerobic dancing. Medical historians now identify the Strasbourg event as a severe case of mass psychogenic illness. This is a phenomenon where intense collective psychological stress triggers real, contagious physical symptoms across a highly cohesive group. The citizens of Strasbourg were living in a concentrated environment of trauma. The severe economic hardship and famine of 1517 had been compounded by freezing winters, violent social unrest, and the horrifying arrival of new, poorly understood diseases like syphilis. Layered on top of that physical suffering was a deep, localized religious dread. The population held a strict cultural belief that a saint named Vitus possessed the power to curse sinners by forcing them into a torturous, unending dance. Driven to the absolute edge of starvation and despair, the population's collective terror manifested as a physical reality. The intense cultural fear of the curse literally overwrote their conscious biology. Realizing their medical strategy was killing citizens, the authorities abruptly pivoted in September. They banned all public music and dancing, loaded the thrashing victims into wagons, and transported them 30 miles into the mountains to a remote religious shrine. This photographic source image shows an effigy of Saint Vitus. At the shrine dedicated to him, the priests initiated a solemn series of rituals to grant the traumatized victims divine absolution. During these ceremonies, the clergy placed small crosses into the choreomaniac's hands. They forced specialized red leather shoes onto the victims' twitching, blistered feet, and painted the tops and soles with consecrated oil. Immersed in the heavy scent of incense and the sound of Latin incantations, the victims finally stopped moving. This theatrical, superstitious intervention broke the dissociative trance, bringing the fatal epidemic to a sudden halt. Because the disease was born entirely from a collective belief in a divine curse, it could only be cured by an equally powerful belief in divine forgiveness. The dancing plague serves as a reminder that under extreme distress, the human operating system can trap us inside our own flesh, generating horrors entirely from within.
The dancing plague of 1518 remains one of the strangest events ever recorded. People dancing, not out of joy, but as if they had no control over their own bodies. Even today, experts debate what really happened: stress, disease, or something we still don't understand. But the most unsettling part is this: what if the human mind, under the right conditions, can push the body beyond its limits without warning? And what if it could happen again? What do you think caused it? Let me know in the comments. If you're curious about mysteries like this, make sure to subscribe to Curiosity Rift, because history doesn't just tell stories, sometimes it hides them.